All right. Welcome back to the spatial show here. My name is Vladimir Bosanac, one of the co hosts. In my daily life, I'm also the co founder publisher of The Registry, a West Coast commercial real estate news organization.
Vlad, my man, always good to be back with you. I'm Elliot Golan, one of the other, well, the only other co hosts here. And during the day, I help lead the real estate practice at a global PR and communications agency.
Yeah, Elliot, where are you? Are you still in Seattle? Anything to report
Yeah,
from the last week?
yeah. Well, I mean, I know this is going to shock you, man, but like a lot of rain. What do they call it? Atmospheric river, which of course, as
Yes.
someone who grew up in Los Angeles, what the heck is that, guys? What he's talking about? What's an atmospheric river? But yeah, we got some serious rain the last week or so, man. How are
Well,
things
I'll
over by you in the Bay?
We can certainly use it here in the Bay. That's for sure. Although there has been some rains apparently down in Southern California that have now caused landslides and that kind of
Yep.
thing. So they're getting kind of a double whammy of natural disasters over the last
Yeah.
60 days here. But yeah, other than that, things are good. Things are busy, and I feel even though I think our conversation today is going to venture into some slightly negative territory. I think the mood seems to be relatively good throughout the industry, at least here in
Yeah.
Northern California.
Yeah. No, I agree. People I talk to are, I mean, it's kind of cliche to say it at this point, but cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of being cautiously optimistic, we have an interview today with a gentleman who's been around for quite a bit of time. So we are going to be speaking with William McMorrow, the chairman and CEO of Kennedy Wilson, Beverly Hills-based global real estate investment firm that he acquired back in 1998 and 1988, and from a single office and 11 employees, created this multinational entity that now has a publicly traded company in Japan, a publicly traded company in the UK, as well as here in the US. So, interesting conversation about sort of the industry and kind of the firm in general. So that's coming up, and then we'll also. Elliot and I will venture into a couple of news headlines here, talk a little bit about what's happening with the latest consumer sort of sentiment
Yep.
confidence numbers, which just came out recently. Then we'll talk a little bit about some acquisitions here that Blackstone has done, and then we're going to venture into our minds with some deeper thoughts about things that
Yeah.
are on our at least on the top of our minds, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's just a little bit more than a marble bouncing between the ears. Yeah,
Yeah. I have a little more space in between the ears, so I would argue there's a little bit more noise, but
I
that's just me.
like it. I like it.
All right, so let's dive into this consumer sentiment, consumer
Yeah,
confidence. Wells Fargo put out a study just this week, which is actually something that I think others have studied and put out similar kind of reports. There's definitely some news that the consumer confidence numbers are down in the last month. Obviously, a lot going on with what's happening around our Doge efforts in
right.
Washington D.C. and the new leadership. I think that's certainly playing a role. Not the only reason confidence is down, but I think that there are some numbers around unemployment and inflation that are persistent, and I think people are just concerned that this might affect them as well. Elliot, have you heard these rumblings?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, last year the entire conversation was interest rates are going to start coming down. We're getting inflation under control. Job market is great.
Yep.
All three of those things have turned out to be as far from the truth as humanly possible. So, I see it. I see that interest rates they're not going to go anywhere. Inflation is nowhere near under control, and then you add in the, let's call it, nervousness around tariffs and some trade issues that could arise. And I get it. I totally understand why these figures are where they are.
Yeah, there's a polite term around in inflation which I hear often, and it's normalized, stabilized. That's kind of
Right,
the
right.
word that I hear. But the number that Wells Fargo put out is that basically the consumer confidence, and I think they measure it, in sort of in the percentages, which I'm not sure is going to make a whole lot of sense. But the headline from that analysis that it's at its lowest number since February of 21, so almost a decade here,
Wow.
and it also seems to correspond very closely with investor sentiment. I've listened to a podcast actually just today, which referenced the University of Michigan study, which is a fairly kind of even keeled, I think, analysis of
Yeah.
both consumer confidence and investor sentiment. That one also is indicating there are fewer bulls around in terms of what the expectation is around employment. I learned a long time ago in this industry, jobs drive everything. They
Yep.
certainly drive retail, certainly drive housing, certainly drive how many people are occupying commercial space. That's going to impact, what they're buying, how much they're buying, which is going to impact, as we know, industrial now too, right? It's going to
Right.
impact travel, which means hospitality and
Right.
other sectors. And if there's a fear that unemployment is going to bump up, I think there's a lot of narrative around inflation and interest rates, but I think unemployment is really another one that probably is more worrisome for the economy than I would say those other two.
Sure. You see people turning into kind of, rightfully so, fiscal hermit crabs. And consumer spending is the fuel of the economy. I mean, if you want to be, was it sorry, 18 months, maybe 2 years ago now, people were saying we're headed for a recession. We're headed for a recession. And I made the argument to colleagues that the more you say it, the more likely we will, because the fear of it will put people's hands back in their pockets. And when they stop spending money, all they're doing is taking us there quicker.
I think you're absolutely right. It can become a self-fulfilling prophecy,
Right.
and I think given the national news that we're kind of experiencing here on a daily basis, I definitely think it's beginning to scare people. Um, Certainly, federal jobs are you know being reduced, to say the least.
Yep.
Whether they're going to be recalled back and these people will be rehired back, we don't know. I mean, that's certainly something that's not something we're going to figure out anytime soon. But that means, other people are also going to be worried what the sort of downstream effects of these lost jobs might be on the rest of the economy. And therefore, Wells Fargo is now reporting inflation expectation is surging
Yep.
from around 5.2 to 6% this month in February. And so, that's not necessarily good for this industry, right?
Definitely not. Definitely not. It's going to be interesting. I still think, and maybe this was 2 weeks ago, you and I were talking. Um, Kind of the uncertainty. I think chaos is an appropriate word. It fuels a lot of this stuff. Literally, just people not knowing what the heck is going on, what's going to happen next, and if things stabilize, hopefully a lot of this just goes away. Whatever, another terrible cliche, whatever the new normal looks like.
Right. We know the new normal is not going to be the old normal. That's
That's
one
for
thing for
sure.
sure, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the new normal, that terrible cliche, really started around kind of the office market, and I know it's kind of our favorite thing to talk about, but there's some new data out I wanted to talk about related to everyone's favorite real estate topic, which is, are we going back to the office? And I'm now in my head. I think this is the biggest game of chicken. I mean, this is quasi Cold War chicken as far as I'm concerned, right? Gorbachev, and the fingers are on the button. So FDI Consulting, they put out a report. 74% of fully remote workers said they are likely to seek new employment if they are required to go back to the office full time. 74%. Now, before you react to that kind of astonishing number, the reason I say playing chicken is we just talked about a kind of unstable job market. So, where the heck do y'all think you're going? And I say this as a work from home guy, so I'm not against them by any means, but where do you think the jobs are that you're going to leave for?
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. It is very worrisome. I think that worrisome for the people that think that they have leverage. I think that leverage
Yeah,
is quickly dissipating, and I think that we might be entering sort of a phase where employers are now beginning to probably have a little bit more ability to bring people back into the office. I think it's going to be, something that affects people across the board. But we are already seeing some. This is anecdotal. In one market, and one market being Seattle, your hometown,
yeah,
there has been some reporting from the Seattle Downtown Association, or Downtown Seattle Association, sorry. They will correct me quickly on this one, that the mandate for Amazon employees to be back into the office is beginning to trickle into the numbers that they're seeing in terms of activity throughout the city. Um, and in January of this year, the DSA, Downtown Seattle Association, recorded nearly 2 million unique visitors to the city, which is about 94% of where it was in 2019. So it's a big
wow,
bump, about 14% increase compared to January of 24 even. So in just 1 year, it's bumped quite a bit, but it's getting really, really close to where its sort of numbers were back in 2019 pre-COVID. Interestingly, whether this is something that we can say is causal
right,
or not. I think we need some more data, but at least it's beginning to show that people, at least in Seattle, even with the weather, they are they're congregating more in the downtown sort of areas. I am curious, what this means for other markets, but that's
sure.
one sort of anecdote that we can reference, right?
Yeah, and I think I'm sure this is talked about just not nearly as much as it should be, which is work workplace and workspace as an amenity. Now, developers and architects use that a lot, but they're usually referring to ping pong tables and natural light. No, no, no. I'm talking about sweatpants. I'm talking about, being at home, drinking good coffee, etc. So when you look at it, the data said 45% being able to work remotely or flexibly was one of the most important aspects of their employment.
Yeah.
45%. So, right, we have the big things, right? Salary, bonuses, health insurance, all the things you expect from your employer. I think this is something that's just added to the same list now.
I'm curious, do you think that going forward, as you know, employees are looking for new work and companies really want to bring them on board, that this will become a negotiating tactic? This will be a little bit of
Yep.
leverage that they can sort of push and say, hey, Fridays, I want to be able to work more, remotely. I don't think it's a new concept, but I am curious if it's going to become sort of a, you know, something that's used more frequently now,
Yeah.
especially if it might be going away, right?
I think it's just going to be another one of the poker chips, right? I mean, when you're in your negotiations, sometimes companies want to reduce salary but increase bonus
Yeah.
opportunity because the math just works out better for them. Now it's pretty industry standard that vacation time is 3 weeks or more in serious white collar professions. But there was a time when it was 2 weeks and you negotiated for three. It's kind of this extra, come on, give me something, guys. You really want me? I think this is just the next thing. Okay, so 3 weeks, good. We've come to the best compromise we can on all the financial aspects. But I want to get one more thing out of the employer to really have them show me how valued I am. I'm not going to the office every day. And whatever the arrangement is dependent
Yeah.
on sector, company, employee, probably market, myriad topics. But I just think it's the next thing on that list you negotiate.
Yeah. And there's enough technology these days that you can deploy or employ or whatever you want to say, to understand whether somebody's productive or not, right? I mean, I think at this point, a lot of these meetings, like you and I are doing this show virtually, obviously others, I mean, that's become a norm these days, right? So I don't necessarily think that it's looked down upon as much as maybe it was, I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years
Yeah,
ago. If you were to
right.
come in and say, I want to work from home Fridays, typically if you requested something like that, it was mostly for some really kind of extraordinary circumstance, like you're a caretaker, or you had some
Right.
arrangement that maybe, I don't know, you traveled out of the region on a regular basis. I do wonder, as companies do require people to go back into the office, what this does for female workers. Obviously, I think moms tend to carry the brunt of some of the household kind of oversight, and I do wonder if this may impact that part of our
Sure.
population, more so than the male workers, right? And so
Yeah, I remember seeing all kinds of stories
yep,
when everyone started working from home about how moms were really like flourishing and appreciating this flexibility so that they could continue in their role as parent
right,
and primary caregiver, as well as contribute financially at a large scale to the
yeah,
family, and that's always been a challenge.
yeah. And Elliot, I think you mentioned there was a study also that you saw that there was a good number of sort of parents with kids sort of under 18 that wanted to go to the office.
Yeah, so it's
And
actually from the same. It's from the same research, and I just found it, kind of one of those funny things, right? Like, was it workers with children under the age of 18? Like 40% of them were excited to return to the office. And it's kind of the
teenage
old,
kids, I think I
yeah,
understand why.
yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of demographic and sort of psychographic stuff in this research that's kind of obvious, right? Like baby boomers are more likely to be okay with the RTO mandate as compared to Gen Z, right? I mean, like I
Right.
didn't need a research report to know that. I'm human.
Yeah.
Um, but sticking with the office, the last thing I want to talk about very briefly, but then I want to get into inside your mind, as it were. Um, the office market again. Everything is about office. So Blackstone has been in the news quite a bit in the last few days, which is of course nothing new for their real estate group.
Yeah.
Um, I believe it's 2 days ago now. They dropped $5.6 billion on a marina company to own marinas, which we'll get into in a little bit. Probably safe recurring revenue model. I'm guessing that's a lot of the calculus. And just today, Goldman Sachs has moved to foreclose an office building that Blackstone owns in Chicago. Now, of course, everyone around the industry knows this is all just a game. It's not like John Gray ran out of cash, right? They could pay the loan if they wanted to. Um, but they've to use another terrible cliche, it's cliche day. Um, like a lot of office landlords, they've sort of decided that the juice is not worth the squeeze. Um, and Goldman has apparently asked the Cook County Circuit Court judge to order that the property be sold at foreclosure.
Yeah,
That's
I think you're absolutely right. I don't think Blackstone is running out of money anytime soon. One of their perspectives, likely, and I've heard them sort of speak and be interviewed over the last couple of years. They're looking at how does this asset perform, and they're
right.
probably looking at one by one to understand what is the opportunity here, what's going to happen. I imagine with this River North Point property that they're basically cutting their losses, right, and
Right.
sort of trying to move on to areas with more opportunity, like the marinas, which is sort of a very interesting acquisition in many ways. it's a very limited asset when you think about it. I don't know what the production of new marinas is on an annual basis. I don't think very
Yeah,
many are made. They're probably difficult to do, and you have a population of people that if you have a boat, you need to use a marina. There's no
right.
other way around it, right? And typically there's years of wait lists to get a slip in a marina. It could be a very, very nice business. What else about this have you found out?
Well, I think the thing that I find the most interesting is the concept of, well, there's two concepts. One is kind of being theoretically recession proof. And the second is the topic of recurring revenue. And this actually touches our industry substantively.
Yeah,
So it was not too long ago that most of the major brokerage houses, they did a little bit of property management, but it wasn't like a big part of their business. They were deals, transactions. But transactions go up and transactions go down in the cycle, and things like property management are just recurring revenue. I mean, the property needs to be managed. So, and I'll always use the anecdote I tell friends. So, my father was a plumber, and he used to joke all the time, I am completely recession proof because it does not matter what inflation is when your bathtub stops working.
right.
It doesn't, I mean, your garbage disposal stops working. I don't care if you got laid off. You probably want to fix it.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that's what this marinas thing is. I think that's really the play they're making here is I'm sure there is some portion of people that own a boat and in the bad times may have to sell their boats. But I'm guessing that's the exception to the rule. The type of people that own boats and regularly store them in marinas, good economy, it's in the marina. Bad
yeah,
economy, it's in the marina.
yeah,
I think that's what it comes down to. And again, Blackstone is the most opportunistic real estate group we've seen.
yeah.
They get it,
And we've seen this with their investment in the data center space as well,
right?
which they've
Right.
announced in 24, and some of it also this year as well. They're making a big play there in Europe and also here in the States. They're basically looking at where the economy is going to go, and they're looking at how can they sort of be part of that
Yep.
um, economic evolution, if you will. And data centers certainly are not going anywhere. Everything we touch today is a digital device that's connected to something.
Right.
So data passing through servers is going to be something that for the rest of our lives and our grandkids' lives
Yeah.
will be will be just going on. So that's
It
definitely
seems so obvious. We see it as brilliant, rightfully so. Right. Blackstone is again gonna perform well with their decisions, but it seems so obvious. A few years ago they went hard into student housing with some big acquisitions, self storage, big acquisitions, BTR, big acquisitions.
yeah,
And these are sectors that anyone in real estate, if you ask them, like, what do you think about BTR? Well, no one can buy a house, so they might as well rent it. Like, this isn't rocket science.
right, yeah,
To your point, data centers. Like, are you going to ever find anyone that says data centers are, I think they're near the bubble? No, man. Like, we've just begun.
yeah. Yeah, and they own or co-own Biomed Realty, so they're in life science as
Right.
well. Similar with Link Logistics
Yep.
on the industrial side. So yeah, this is a company that will continue to be a major player, obviously, in
Yeah.
commercial real estate through all different sectors. So more to come from them, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
So, Elliot, should we go deep inside my mind and see what's happening there, or should we just sort of skim the surface and not bother people with deals that I'm dealing with in my head? What are your thoughts?
I've been waiting my whole life for the chance to
Your whole
crawl
life.
through. Yeah, yeah, even before I knew you, to crawl through your eardrum. and find out what is hiding deep inside of me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
have
yeah.
it.
So these days, interesting things. But one item that I thought we should, bring up, which is kind of interesting. So there's been some, news obviously around what's happening with our efficiencies and, reduction in force across the federal government. Uh, the way that this news is directly impacting commercial real estate is that GSA, or the General Services
Services. Yeah.
Administration, is looking to offload something along the lines of 500 buildings
Yep.
that it owns across the country. Locally here, the impact of that has been felt through a couple of buildings that are downtown San Francisco, but there are many others. Obviously, the narrative is that we need to be more efficient, and these are outdated, properties, or at least that's the narrative for some of them. Um, I'm not 100% sure that it makes a ton of sense. To be perfectly honest, if you were to talk to any sort of commercial real estate person, you would see that on a long-term basis, owning an asset is going to be a much sort of cheaper proposition than leasing it. I do think, well, of the two properties that are in San Francisco, one is actually fairly new. It's called the Nancy Pelosi Federal Building, which I wonder if that had anything to do with it being put on this chopping block. The other one is a
Yeah.
lot older, but still, these buildings are occupied, and if these employees are going to go anywhere, I imagine they're going to go to private landlords.
Right.
Whom does this benefit? Sort of the cynic in me thinks that this is a bit of a ploy. But Elliot, would love to hear what you think about this.
I mean, from a pure efficiency standpoint, since that's the word that seems to be in vogue related to this topic, I don't know the math makes sense. The lease
To
rate.
hold on to
No,
the building,
to
right?
sell. I mean, over a 10-year lease, which let's pretend we're in a world where 10 years is still kind of the normal office lease. Um, I have to imagine that the carrying cost of owning the property is less than the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of square feet that you'd be leasing.
Right.
And also, I mean, there's two other aspects of this that I kind of want to see what happens. So, one is, of course, the narrative that these are kind of old, shoddy buildings. So, does that mean the government agencies are going to go into nicer buildings? Because then the math definitely doesn't make sense if they want to lease, Transamerica, right, or
Right.
prime Brookfield
Right.
properties in LA. The price per square foot is going to crucify them. Um, but then the second thing is, I thought the federal government was all in on RTO. So it's not like you can just kind of condense people. I don't think there's enough layoffs that your, 500 buildings worth of square footage you don't need anymore. That's not real.
Yeah, I think the counter argument, and I'm not um, advocating for the argument, but let's say that there is one. I would imagine them saying, "Well, we're not going to have as many employees, so we're going to be more efficient. Therefore, we're not going to need as much space. So perhaps we should get rid of some of these buildings, and we don't really need 500 of them, right?" Or whatever number that they have in mind.
Ends up happening.
Makes a lot of sense. I don't know that it makes a lot of sense, but I can see that argument. But again, we don't know. Once a lot of these people are laid off, we don't know at what point will they realize, wait a second, I think we've cut to the bone. We probably need to bring a bunch of them back, and then what does that mean, right?
Right.
So I don't think the easy math is being done to sort of say, oh, it's 200 square feet per employee. We're going to get rid of these many employees. Therefore, this is this much in terms of square feet, which equates to 500 buildings. Again,
Right.
right.
Right. Right.
These are all made up numbers, I think. Another thing that I'd like to bring up, which is kind of why this has been bouncing around my head. So 3 years ago, we wrote a story in our Puget Sound market. So in Olympia, there's an owner that put on the market about 24 of these properties, 95% occupied, mind you. I think like 94.5% occupied by various sort of state and federal agencies.
Okay.
Um, they've been on the market since.
Right.
So, and this is a private owner. This is not even, a federal owner or a state owner. So a private owner arguably probably took care of these buildings really, really well because
Right.
it's in their interest to do so. In terms of occupancy, I don't think you can find better than 94.5% in any
No,
office
even
type
in
of
good
setting.
markets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even in great markets, and Olympia will continue to be the capital of the state of Washington, um, as far as I know, and
Yeah.
they're having a really hard time, moving these right. On top of that, my understanding is that even if they decide to sell these properties, this is not just kind of a, oh, let's put out a flyer and see what happens.
Right.
I'm sure because they're under sort of federal ownership, there will need to be some kind of a formal valuation of these assets, most likely some kind of public notices, right?
Right.
Given
Right.
about
Some bureaucracy.
exactly, and then possibly even legislative approval, um, because you can't like which price, who are you going to hire, which broker is going to do this, right? This is not going to be just something that they can decide, in a conference room in one week, right?
Right.
And so this process is going to take, I think, a lot longer than maybe some of our new administrators in Washington think that it's going to take.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the appetite thing also can't be overlooked. So there aren't many people buying office buildings. There's no market for this level of
Right.
investment in commercial office
Right.
in any class. Class A, CBD, Class C, rundown, infill, doesn't matter. There's just no market. So the thing that runs through my head, um, let me preface with this wouldn't be a terrible thing overall, but it just financially doesn't make sense for the government, so it would shoot down the entire argument about efficiency. Is can some of these be sold at a very low valuation for complete redevelopment? Because especially a lot of these properties that GSAs sit in, they're like GSA buildings, right? It's not like there's, this government agency on the first floor and a lawyer on the second floor. No, they're usually occupied exclusively by these government entities. So I'm wondering, with some incentives from the government, um, probably some very sweetheart deals, will we actually see converting office to residential become more than an overblown headline, which, as far as I'm concerned, that's all it is. Um, maybe there's a play there. Now, financially, it still doesn't make sense for the federal government, right? They still need to put people in chairs. So
Yeah,
either way,
and let's not forget zoning, right? That's a huge issue. I think there's probably all kinds of infrastructure things that need to be sort of
sure,
updated and changed to sort of allow for kind of housing development, and things like that, right? I know certainly in our two states, there's always concern about water and energy and where's that going to come
yeah,
from. And so, yeah, we'll see. I guess we'll see how it's all going to play out. But my concern is that this is going to take a very, very long time. Maybe some of these assets will be cherry picked in terms of
yeah.
their appeal for either alternate uses, or maybe they can be quickly converted to some really cool offices that might be rented to other tenants. But I don't think this is going to be as easy of a process, and I wonder if 4 years from now we will still have this memo out that 500 plus buildings are on the market, and
It wouldn't surprise me.
none of them have been taken. So
I mean, especially if
that's
there's an honest valuation of them, right? I mean, we've been talking about this everywhere around the industry, the whole misconception between what a building was last appraised for
right.
and what the heck it's actually worth. And no
And what is
asset
it based
class
on
is
today?
suffering. Right.
What If
No
there are
asset
no
loss.
comps, if there are no comps for federal buildings, that are they going to be empty now? So if you
Right.
close these agencies, so you're going to just sell somebody an empty asset. What's your expectation to get in terms of this asset? Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
see. It's an interesting kind of dilemma we're dealing with, and I'm curious how it's all going to play out. But we'll be following it for sure.
Oh, that's for sure.
So so Elliot, as I'd like to say, another great half hour wasted here.
Yeah, and for the people listening, I'm sure they're shaking their head, wondering why they didn't do something more productive. But hey,
No, because they were waiting for our interview now
right,
with Bill McMorrow that's coming up. So stay tuned for that conversation. Elliot, always great to see you and look forward to our conversation again next week.
talk soon. Thank you, man.
Go. Okay. Uh, Bill, good morning. How's it going?
Morning, Vlad. Going great. Thank you.
Where do we find you today? Where are you?
You find me at our HQ here in Beverly Hills. We built two buildings here in Beverly Hills about 10 years ago. And so we're in one of those.
Okay. And clearly they're not becoming obsolete post COVID.
No, I think we really our team did it the right way. And I'd really like to think that they did something that was built to last.
Yeah.
And we've got everybody back in the office. Wasn't the easiest thing I've ever done, but they're all here.
Yeah. I am curious, how did this, obviously you're in the real estate industry, right? Most of the people in the industry want people back into the office, right? And maybe not going into, specific deals, but how hard was it? Were people hoping to be there sooner? Culturally, what did it do to you guys to not be together? And then how did that evolve as you guys got back into the office again?
I would say anecdotally, it was probably the hardest period of leadership. I think for many, many people in many companies, because you go through this period where we're shutting down in whatever year it was, 20 or 21, and nobody had ever done that before. And I got everybody in the company together, and I said, look, there's going to be unintended consequences for these actions because we've never done it before. And there were so many unintended consequences of this, but the biggest one was that all of us learned to love being remote, right? We could be anywhere, and we were still doing well in our business. Uh, but I don't think anybody that's a leader of anything doesn't think that you have to have people together to generate ideas, to create your culture. Uh, and so I'm just a huge teamwork person. And I believe that some of the best ideas come from, walking down the hallway and having a simple conversation with somebody. And so once you've now gone remote for what turned out to be a couple years, and everybody kind of adjusts their lifestyles around that, then now you're bringing everybody back.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be the dictator of writing a memo that everybody has to come back to the office, because I really felt that was stupid, to be honest with you. And so, we started 3 days a week. We graduated to 4 days, and that's what we're doing now. And I would say that it's worked well. At the beginning, we were providing lunches, dinners, time for beer in the afternoon, whatever it was that we thought would make people want to be at the office. But I think now that everybody's back, they're in the mode where they want to be here. So the big $64 question is whether you go to 5 days next year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we'll see on that one.
It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. It's evolving. If there's one thing that I've learned in the 17 years that I've been in this industry, that it's always evolving. It's never static. Even in the sort of pre-COVID days, right? The workplace was always evolving, and how you set it up, and how you program the interiors. It was always something new. So that will definitely continue to happen.
Well, you are making an interesting point about that because we spent a lot of time planning this building that really revolved around a couple things, making it a great place to want to come to work, but also setting it up in a way where hopefully it encourages communication uh, with everybody. And we went through many, many, many different iterations of this before we finally settled on what we did. And it was some of the simplest things. We created a stair. We like to copy other people, but we created a stairwell system here that I saw in one of the Apple stores, and that it forces everybody to walk up and down this 3-story building and talk to each other.
Yeah,
So it was just simple things like that.
yeah. Interesting. Well, Bill, I would like to kind of start at the beginning, if you will. Would love to hear a little bit about you, your background personally, how you got into this business, but how you got interested in commercial real estate in the first place.
Well, how I got into the business was really pretty circuitous, and I, as I tell people, I really had the very good fortune of growing up in a great family with one of 9. Had to learn to be independent in that kind of environment, and and got taught the virtue really young in my life of how to work hard. Uh, when I got out of school at USC, I thought the world was mine. Uh, I went to undergraduate and graduate school there, but then I learned quickly after 50 job interviews, I got one job offer. And so, people will say, "What did you do?" I said, "You're kidding me. I took it." But it set me on a career path that I never dreamed of because I didn't want to go to work at a bank. And I had to move out of Southern California to Northern California. And in that time, that was like a big deal. But I was working in a bank, and I got thrown into some early projects that really were in a certain way life changing for me. And then I had, in my 17 years in the banking industry, I had 3 people, maybe 4, that were either bosses or mentors of mine that gave me a lucky break to do something I wasn't ready for. And, in my case, when I went to work for Crocker Bank, which is now part of Wells Fargo, they asked me to write a report on the airline industry. What did I know as a 23-year-old about the airline industry? But the bank had a big exposure to it. And so one of the older guys said, "Would you like to go visit the manufacturing plants of the people that are building these aircraft?" I said, "Sure." And so it was just such an eye opener to me to be involved in financing these manufacturing facilities. Uh, and it really launched me as I got off of this training program into the corporate lending world, where we were lending money to big companies here in California and mid-sized companies. Uh, and in those days, there wasn't business development part of it just didn't exist. But I started calling on big companies here in Los Angeles, and my simple pitch was, "I have money to lend. Would you like me to come and see you to see if you want to borrow it?" And so early on in my career, I was able to start developing business. And when I was 25, I got hired by what was the 9th largest bank in the country to run their corporate lending group. And I was 25 years old. And so I moved to Philadelphia. I got to see what was going on in New York. I got to travel all over the United States of America, to every inch of this country, to visit clients, manufacturing facilities. We were a big lender to the public utility industry. And so but most of the people that were working with me at that time were, sometimes twice my age. And so that's, where the hard work part of it came in. But so I'm giving you the long-winded answer. And then when I was 30, I got hired by a bank here in Los Angeles to essentially run a bank that had lots of issues related to the real estate industry. Because in 1980, the interest rates were 21%. And you could have been the smartest person in the world, but you were not going to make money
Yeah.
in the real estate business. In fact, you were going to lose your real estate. And so we started taking back real estate into ownership. We decided to bring in 35 people that were not bankers and take over the real estate that wasn't bad real estate, but they were a victim of these high interest rates. That was where I really learned the real estate business. And I was fortunate to be working for, one of the great entrepreneurs here in Southern California who was the primary owner of the bank. But he was in his 60s, I was 30, and he became kind of my father figure in my career. And so as we got the bank cleaned up and became very successful, the bank was sold to Comerica Bank. And I wanted to do, it was a little bit like what you and I talked about. I wanted to do something on my own. I didn't want to work for a bank in a big organization any longer. And so I came across this company, Kennedy Wilson, which had already been started, but was in different businesses. And so I was able to purchase that company in 1988. And the business that we were in we were a real estate auction business, primarily auctioning real estate for financial institutions.
Interesting. And that was an interesting time to do that too, I would say, right?
There's where the luck part came in, because what happened in 1990, the S&L crisis came, and the regulators, particularly the FDIC, started taking over all these S&Ls, and they needed a way to liquidate real estate. And so the auction business, which was a tiny business at Kennedy Wilson, actually turned into a really great business. And off of that, we became principals buying real estate. And so the whole idea was to have a fee generating business alongside a acquisition equity business. And because of, I would say, I'm not an I person, my banking background, a lot of what we were doing on the acquisition side focused on buying things at bargain prices from the banking industry, and in some cases, the same banks that we were doing auctions for. And so that principle that we started with in 1988 has never changed. And if you think about Kennedy Wilson, we started a business from scratch in Japan in 1994 that revolved around their banking and economic, I don't know if I want to call it crisis, but they clearly were having a downturn. We went to Europe in 2010 to the United Kingdom and Ireland at a time where nobody wanted to go. But everything we were doing there really related to us being a counterparty with the banking system.
Yep.
And because there was nobody there in the United Kingdom and Ireland with capital, we were able to, in the case of Ireland, become the largest real estate owner in the country during that period of time, and probably still are in the top three. So it was all of these kind of circumstances that allowed us to do the things and really, for me and everybody here, create these great careers.
I'm curious over this period of time, Bill. If you look back now over those last 30 years, right? Obviously, there were a number of milestones throughout that period that sort of defined the company. Um, maybe you can kind of give us a little bit of insight of sort of how some of that kind of came about on its own versus how some of it was planned. I'm sure there's a combination of each, but I would love to just get a bit of a perspective in terms of how life of running a company like this can evolve, and sometimes in unexpected areas.
A lot of it was foundational that I learned in the banking industry and from people in the banking industry. And then I've always had this concept or idea that you have to say yes at the beginning of any idea, because if you say no, you foreclosed every opportunity. And so in 1994, I had to make a trip to Japan because we had to. I'd never been to Tokyo in my life, but we had to get approval from one of the Japanese banks to do an auction for their client here in Southern California. Well, when I got over there, I said, I've traveled 6,500 miles. Why don't I talk to a bunch of banks? So I went around and made appointments on my own to see people in the various real estate departments in these Japanese banks. And I came to the conclusion that the type of lending they were doing to their clients, which was primarily focused on coming to the United States and buying real estate, was not a very sound practice. So the first week I was there, we opened an office in Japan. And, of course, everybody thought I was out of my mind. But it actually turned into an unbelievable career moment for Kennedy Wilson, because we hired this extraordinary person to start our business there. And in 2002, we grew to a point where we took our company public in Japan. And so we were the first U.S. real estate company to ever go public in Japan on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. So it was that little idea. Little ideas. I'm going to Japan. And then in the Great Recession, we viewed that as a period of time where there was going to be extraordinary opportunities, but there was no ability to raise capital anywhere. I had 1,000 meetings, I'm not exaggerating, in 2009 and 10 trying to raise capital. I was at a Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting. I met the CEO of Fairfax Financial, which is one of the largest now property casualty insurance companies in the world. I met the CEO. Had a half-hour meeting with him. He said, I really like your idea. And if you're ever on the East Coast, can you come and see me? And I thipped a little bit and said, I'm planning on being there next week. And I said, would you be available next week? And he said, yeah, come and see me Thursday. So I go and see Prem Watsa, who is just one of the most extraordinary business leaders I've ever been around. And I go to see him. There's like 10 people in the room. We're making this presentation. He says, can we go in the other room? I said, sure. I go in the other room with him, and he said, I really like your ideas here. So, basically, how do we make this happen? And so I said, look, I'd like you to have an ownership interest in KW, and then I'd like you to give us capital alongside that to invest. And so he said, sounds like a great idea. How much? And I told them, and he said, that seems like a lot. And we started, we closed that in 3 weeks. And so now, 14 years later, Kennedy Wilson, we've done $15 billion of joint ventures together. So that first 350 million turned into 15 billion. So that was a defining moment for us.
Right.
And then going to Europe was a big defining moment for us. And we created a public company on the London Stock Exchange in 2014. Those two things I had learned from my time in the banking business, that every once in a while, if you could roll these companies out from underneath your own umbrella, it makes sense to do that. Uh, and then I would say the last piece of this was in 2023 when we had the meltdown in the banking system here in the United States. Another opportunity raised its hand, and that was to buy a $5.7 billion construction loan portfolio from a regional bank, but it had to be done in 30 days. And so that was a big challenge. And so now we got that done and fast forwarded. That is our incredible credit business that we have today. And so all of these things were, very transformational to the company, but it took a lot of great teammates who were willing to kind of see through. Okay, I'm in Ireland. Well, what are you doing here, Bill? And so, it was these kinds of things. And I should also say the other thing I'm leaving out, we bought a real estate asset management business in Ireland in 2011. It only had 14 people in it. But I learned from Japan that if you can have your own team on the ground, you can really do amazing things. And so I would say you had to add that to our history.
So fast forwarding to, what happened over here in the last few years, tell us a little bit about sort of what's your perspective kind of on the market now. We're in this sort of post-COVID days. Obviously, the interest rate environment has played a major role in commercial real estate over the last couple of years and probably continues to do so. There seems to be some kind of glimmer of hope that the commercial real estate industry is, ending 24 on a bit of a, lighter, higher note. But I'd like to hear what's your perspective and kind of how you see, things in 2024 as we go into the next year.
I've had the advantage of going through 7 or 8 cycles, and I told everybody when the Great Recession started, this was going to be the greatest opportunity we ever had if we could raise capital. And it turned out to be that way. Everybody thought, here he goes again. But I think the issues that look. The unintended consequences of COVID were the printing of money everywhere in the world by every government. That led to inflation. I knew from my time in 1980 that the only way you could, at the time, inflation was 14% in the United States. The only way you can slow it down was to raise interest rates. So we got the triple whammy. Everything went remote. Everybody printed money. We got the highest inflation rate in 40 years, and we got the highest interest rates in 22 years. That was the deck that everybody in the real estate industry got delivered. And so, fortunately, office is not a big part of our core business, but okay, and then nobody wants to go back to the office. So obviously, if you've got floating rate debt and it's the highest it's been in 22 years and nobody wants to go to the office, as companies' leases mature, they're not going to renew them. And so this was a self-inflicted by the various governments around the world, in my opinion. And you had to deal with it. I think that when I think about 5.5 or 6% interest rates, and I think about that compared to 21, you figure out a way.
Right.
And
well, and it's not that far from like the long-term average, right? That's the other thing. I think if you look at just the last 20 years, you're maybe conditioned to thinking that they should be closer to 1% or 0, but that's not normal.
It's absurd. I mean, if you look at the 100-year U.S. bond rate, I think it touched over 100 years, around 6%. And if you even go back to, because we were doing a financing in 2007, and I had to make a decision as to whether I wanted to let it float or fix it. But the prime rate in 2007 was 8%. And so I made what turned out to be the dumb choice of fixing it. And we ultimately ended up paying it off because the interest rate was 9%. But I thought, wow, if I could get 100 basis points, this was a perpetual preferred, no maturity, 100 basis points above a short-term rate, then wow, that's amazing. But we got spoiled by the 10-year going down to 140 and, thinking that was going to last forever. So look, I think we were fortunate because our credit business has been such a dominant part of our capital deployment the last 15 months. And including what we have in closing, we've done $5 billion of new construction loans, all to multifamily or student housing. And we're probably the largest student housing lender now in the United States. But the universe of people, and these average loans average 100 million, and generally 55 to 60% to cost. And so the number of banks that we're doing it shrunk to nothing. The number of borrowers that have that kind of capital shrunk to a small group. And so that means you, as the lender that had the capital, got the best borrowers and the best projects. And so that's been I think everybody certainly that was able to get into the credit side of the space has done well. The equity investing that we've done over the last year and a half has been modest, when compared to our credit business. But I think it's going to get better next year. I think people are finally having to be realistic about what values are, which is more than anything what drives equity investing. And I do believe that, particularly in the United States, because I travel all over the world, the appetite for capital to come here is huge. Everybody wants to invest in the United States. And so I'm optimistic. I think it will be another challenging year in the real estate business, but I'm optimistic that once you get past 25, you're going to see tremendous opportunities. And so you've got to recognize that and get in front of it. You've got to be willing to take chances to get in front of that. And we just formed a venture with CPPIB, the big Canadian pension plan, and we're buying single family homes to rent in the United Kingdom in that platform. And we have almost $400 million of homes that we've purchased from the big builders in the UK, all generally in the same community. But that's what I'm saying. You still have to move forward and try these new things.
I do want to touch on some of the development stuff, but before we do, because we kind of touched a little bit on the banking and interest rate environment, I would like to talk a little bit about your credit business, just a little bit more in terms of like how do you think that's going to evolve in 2025. And maybe more generally, where do you think sort of, lending in general might go in terms of, potential interest rates? I know a lot of that is still kind of undetermined, depending on some of the, White House policies and that kind of thing. But I'm curious in terms of some big drivers that you think might impact that industry in the next, 12, 18 months.
Well, I think, generally speaking, although it's not as true today as it was a year ago, the banking industry itself, the highly regulated banking industry, stepped back from the real estate industry. unless you're already an existing customer of that bank that you had a relationship with, because they were, under this whole specter of what's going to happen to our office portfolio. Uh, and You've seen every private equity firm, the biggest growth parts of their business has been credit, but credit of all kinds. They're not just doing real estate lending; they're doing unsecured lending. They're buying bonds and credit rated companies. Uh, One of the big private equity firms just did a big financing for I think it was Intel in Ireland. Well, that would normally be business that would be done in the banking industry. And so it's really, really, really gravitating away from the regulated banks to the private sector. How that's all going to turn out, because the speed at which it's all growing is really, it's almost unrecognizable how fast it's growing. And when lending tends to grow fast, that can sometimes have its speed bumps. But I think the credit business for us is, we've been kind of in two narrow platforms: for rent, multifamily, and student housing. And for us, over time, we plan to add some other products to that, but all related to the real estate industry. And for us, we're in the information business. Real estate's our product, but information is really the key. And so now we have a national business across the United States in the lending side, particularly. We have a view into kind of every market, and so we're raising. We had a really good year raising capital globally, both in Canada, Asia, particularly, and so I really I'm an optimist by nature, but I'm optimistic that once we get through the first half of next year, you're going to really see this turn. And clearly we've got a more business friendly environment here in the United States. I don't want to get into politics, but I don't think that the business community was exactly the favorite of I would say some of the politicians over the last 4 years.
Yeah, and going back to some of the development sort of initiatives that you were talking about in the multifamily and student housing, and even the single family housing for rent that you're working on. Tell us about that. How do you see? I mean, obviously, it seems like there's never enough of it. Number one, so I guess it's good to be in the development business of it. But tell us, how do you see that evolving also for you guys specifically, and then more broadly as an industry over the next 18 months?
Well, I think you said it exactly correctly, that there's a shortage of housing everywhere in the world. It's not just here in the United States. It's in Ireland, where we have a rental business, in the United Kingdom. It's everywhere. And so it's not only housing, but it's affordable housing. And so we decided 20 years ago, for example, to lessen our reliance on California, because it was clear with not only the taxation structure, but with the costs and the barriers to build here, that it was pricing people out of the market. And so we started going to Seattle, became a very big part of our apartment business, suburban Seattle, not downtown. Because in order for housing to really work for the equity, you have to have a great jobs market, and you have to have a great education system that's producing younger people that want to work at these companies. And so if you think about Seattle with Microsoft, Safeco, Nordstrom's, I can go on and on down the list. Well, there aren't a lot of those companies here in Southern California anymore. They've left or they've gotten purchased, and so the cost of living is really what's driving a lot of this migration to Boise, Idaho, to Salt Lake City, to Las Vegas, to Albuquerque, New Mexico, uh, and some of these other towns around the United States. So I believe that housing is certainly the best risk-adjusted returns. It's the safest investment you could make, in my opinion, in real estate, because you're not looking like for a single tenant
Right.
in an office building. And so that's really our focus over the next 3 years is how do we either own or are financing 65,000 units. And what we're trying to do is grow that to 100,000 units over the next 3 to 4 years. And to also alongside that, grow our investment management business, which is a fee-driven business where we're basically managing capital alongside ours for a big institutional client. And so that's what we're really focused on.
Right. And other than in the UK, are you participating in the US in any investments around, single family for rent housing?
We're financing some friends of ours that are building it, but we don't own any
Right.
single family homes for rent, but we're financing people.
Going to continue to grow and be a significant sort of segment of the market?
I think 100%. I mean, I think most people prefer to live in a home with a yard, uh, and rather than a vertical building. So that whole idea is here to stay. And then it's a question of, can you find a big enough piece of land? Can you get it through all the approval processes that you need? But it's a great business. We have one project like that in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we have, I think, 10 assets in Albuquerque now. That's by far is one of the best performing assets.
Are you concerned in the student housing sector at all, given that some universities have, had challenging enrollments over the last few years, and it definitely seems like, some smaller schools have also, been forced to shut down. I don't know the extent of your portfolio. Maybe you're, more focused around sort of higher end kind of, brand name schools, but I am curious sort of how, as a product that might evolve also.
Well, our lending in that world is dictated by where the developers want to put it. But we just did a very big loan at the University of Michigan. And if you look at the enrollments that we've done several at Texas A&M. If you look at the enrollments at these bigger, we've done University of Southern California, Cal. I mean, you look at the big name schools, and to the contrary, their student populations are growing.
They have not had any issues. You're right. Yeah.
No, their application, the numbers of applicants are growing, and so you're right. I mean, I think there's going to be a consolidation in the higher education system, just like there was in the banking industry. When I started, there were 14,000 banks. Now there's 4,000. My guess is 10 years from now, there's going to be 2,000. And the same thing will happen, but it all benefit these bigger universities in the end.
Right.
And then you've got the whole overlay of the international student population really wants to come and get educated in the United States. So the big ones are all, if you go back and track their 10 years of applicants and admissions are all growing.
Bill, one other thing that you mentioned was senior housing and affordable housing as one of the sectors in which you guys play, and that obviously has to do with affordability across the board. Tell us a bit about that and how important that is to your business.
Well, Vlad, we got very lucky in 2015 when we got introduced to a company by the name of Vintage Housing Partners, which is based here in Southern California. But the company at the time was controlled and owned by a company in Boston, and they wanted to sell their ownership interest in the company. And we had just sold. We had 50 apartment buildings that we owned in Tokyo primarily that we had just sold. So we had some capital from that. And Matt Windisch, who's the president of the company, and Kurt Zeck and I went and visited with them and the principals of Vintage. Anyway, we made a deal to buy half of that company in 2015. And the two principals of that company who are still running the company are just incredible people, partners, and talented at what they do. And so the idea was, let's take those 5,000 units that we started with and see how we can grow it primarily in the Western United States. And most of that is done by new construction ground up. So in the last 9 years, we've been able to build another 7,000 units. So we have now 12,000 units in the senior and affordable space. And these properties, generally, when you finish them, they lease up 100% in 90 days. And the reason for that is that we're building really communities that look just like a market rate property, but the rents are rent restricted at a lower level. And so there's no mystery. You're developing and providing a product that you can rent for less than you can a market rate unit. We just finished a project in Camarillo, California. That was a big undertaking. We have about 700 market rate units, and on the same property, we built 170 senior and affordable units. And so if you saw them, if you walked onto the property, you could not tell me the difference. They all look alike. So the myth was that you don't build high quality communities. So this is a very much a center post of what we're trying to do in the multifamily business, and we're trying to expand that business now away from entirely the Western United States. But it'll be a big part of our business as we go forward.
Right. Switching gears a little bit, if I can cite one of your colleagues, a land developer here in the Bay Area called Chop Keenan. I've heard him say something along the lines years ago. Real estate is like growing a forest, right? You kind of plant these seeds, and then years on, it becomes something. I am curious, in your perspective, as you look at growth and risk and sort of balancing that, you've been in the industry now for almost 40 years plus, right, with your banking experience. How do you look at that for your organization?
You mean the risk or the long-term aspects of it? If I understand, I think the hardest.
I assume you're continuously trying to grow the business and grow.
For sure. The hardest, the thing that takes the longest seed planting is capital raising. It's not the product that you're investing in or financing or whatever it is, but like I said earlier, I kind of travel the world, and we're always in a capital raising mode. But you don't just attract capital overnight. You have to plant the seed and then nurture it over long periods of time. I think as long as you have the right teammates and the right culture, you're always able to originate opportunities. It's really how do you attract capital to that opportunity? And capital is attracted by your track record, yes, but are the people that in your organization that they're lining up with, do they trust you? They have to trust you with their capital. And we've been lucky. We have great people here at the company, and I'm not just saying that. I'm sure every company says that, but it's really true. And a lot of the people at our company have been with me for 15, 20 years or more, but they started as interns. If you look at our senior management team, almost everybody started as an intern. And that has always been our philosophy, is to bring younger people into the business, train them in the culture of our company, turn them loose, and then, keep them. That's been the whole simple idea. So anyhow, I think the projects always seem to come if you've got the right team out there looking for it. But it's the capital raising that's the key to the whole thing.
I'd like to switch gears here a little bit as we, close the conversation and, turn this around a little bit towards, your personal experience and, perspectives. The last few years have been tough for the industry, obviously, right? I think it's been really tough for people working in the industry too, and I think as a result, perhaps it hasn't attracted a lot of new talent that maybe some other places have. I'm curious, from your perspective, what would be some advice that you'd like to give, people kind of looking for a career, maybe considering commercial real estate as a viable option, and maybe even tie that into, some advice you'd like to even give your, younger self, perhaps, right? And why this is such a great place.
Look, I mean, we're competing against the technology world that seemingly is just going up exponentially every day. And so that's, young people see that. They think, wow, I could go to work for some AI company, and 2 years from now, when I'm 24, I'm going to be a billionaire. And so that's the one side of it. I would say that, we started about 8 or 9 years ago with a summer intern program that at the first part of it really wasn't kind of well received by the senior management. The wonderful person that runs that business here for us, that part of our business, we made it important to everybody. And so we bring 15 younger people into the business every summer, but now we're getting 600 and 700 applications every summer from every possible school in the country. And so it's not that we're not attracting people. You have to be able to create an environment that they think they can, have a meaningful career around, and that they're going to be challenged. And so every year we're still continuing to add as we grow. The key is adding younger people to your team. And so we make a really, really conscious effort. So I don't see any shortage of people that are interested in the business, but you have to go work at it to find them. And then, you've got to make sure that you've got that right person that you're bringing in. And you're going to have some failures, but frankly, our failures have generally been in the older crowd. The younger people, we have a very high batting average with.
And what advice would you give them? So somebody coming into the industry, things to look out for, things to consider as they grow their career and they move around the industry.
It's really simple, Vlad. You have to be willing to work hard. There is no substitute for success if you're not willing to sacrifice your personal time and work hard. That doesn't mean I don't want everybody to play hard too, but you have to work hard. And then I think it really gets back to what I said earlier. You have to have a willingness to say yes. I could take you through a dozen friends of mine who are running companies today because they said yes to some. I have one friend who's big in the private equity world, but when he was in his mid-20s, they said, we'd like somebody to go to South America to start our business there. And who wants to go? There were like 10 people, and he raised his hand. Well, he went. Uh, I went to Philadelphia, which I thought was like the other part of the world when I was 25. And so you've got to be willing to say yes, no matter what it is. The young man that is 30 years old that runs our business in Japan, uh, he was in the property. He could barely speak English when he came to the company. And he was in the property management business. But then we had this idea, okay, we want to really regrow our business in Japan. So I said, Robert, I want you to go run that business for us. And he was like, what? But he's just doing an amazing job. So it's really hard work, saying yes when there's an opportunity, and then being a really good teammate, being willing to do any job that you're asked to do. Then you get recognized. That's the simple thing.
Bill, that was some great advice. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us, and fight on.
All right, Vlad. Yeah, hey, I'll see you later. Thank you for your time.